Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been great to know more about online learning and its many possibilities. I think that your contributions have solved some of our doubts. Classrooms are definitely changing. Blackboards and chalk are but a memory. We are facing an era where digital transformation is not the only revolution. EdTech is a turning point that can change everything. But what is the purpose of educational technology? Our next speakers have major roles in some of the most relevant EdTech companies. There is no higher authority here to talk about this topic. To moderate this debate, we have Miguel Arias here with us. He is the Director of Telefónica Global Entrepreneurship. Welcome, Miguel.
Hi, Marta. It's great to be here. And we're going to be discussing today about the fact if EdTech has reached a tipping point in this 2020 or not. And we have an amazing panel to discuss this. So I'm going to just introduce each of them briefly. First of all, I would like to welcome Matthew Greenfield. He is the managing partner of Rethink Education. Hi, how are you doing?
Fine, how are you?
I'm great. From Brazil, representing the NGO sector, we have got Denis Misne. I hope I said this right. Denis, he's the co-founder of, and CEO, of Lehman Foundation. Hi, Denis.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And representing a bit the corporate and investor world at once, from the UK, we've got Charles McIntyre, co-founder of EdTechX. Hello, Charles.
Hi, nice to see you, and it's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Wonderful. And to start with, I think we can all agree that EdTech has received tremendous amount of funding over the last years, so many rounds, more than $10 billion raised lately. We can see that EdTech is becoming mainstream. Everybody's talking about this. And we have also seen this tremendous change in behavioral patterns through the pandemic, right? I mean, we have seen so much more usage of online tools over the last years. I think it was Lenin that said that there are decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. And we saw this happening over the last months. So my first question would be, I think, first for you, Charles, this is for Matthew. I mean, what do you think are the biggest changes that you saw over the last months?
So when my firm started back in 2012, the dominant assumption of most venture capitalists was that we were going to use robots to replace human teachers, and that students would sit in front of screens and learn things by watching videos and responding to quizzes. And now we've had a massive experiment with, conservatively, at least 2 billion people participating in human conversation, the component of education that Charles described earlier, that involves people talking to each other and human empathy and human habits and values. And in a strange way, that has caught much of the EdTech industry flat-footed because so many people had bet on the robot hypothesis. So the online program managers, for example, the industry that helps universities to go online and build successful online programs, build largely asynchronous programs where students work in isolation and did not see each other's faces and hear each other's voices for the most part. There are actually only 2 online program managers that started from the very beginning with video conferences and seminar-style education. Both of them were started by one man, Von Katzman, and I happen to have been lucky enough to invest in both. I happen also not to have invested in Coursera and Udacity, which have done pretty well with the robot hypothesis, but I think people are questioning that hypothesis now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen all this tremendous change, but I think the question is, will this change last after the pandemic is over, or will everybody rush back to the proper habits they had before? I mean, will we rush back to the physical school? So what do you think, Denis? Is this lasting, or is this going to just be a fate?
I think there are some things that change that will last. One is what I call the psychological barriers for teachers to adopt technology. So some of these psychological barriers was this old idea, maybe with a mindset of the 80s or 90s, that technology was such a hard thing to use, that teachers would be, the students would outsmart teachers in the use of technology. And I think what we're seeing in the pandemic is that using Zoom, using other kinds of video conferencing tools, using WhatsApp to mobilize your students is not that hard, right? And actually teachers use that on their regular basis. You're able to use Google Drive or any other kind of collaboration software. So I think that psychological barrier has been removed, and we see this in data in Brazil. Over 79% of teachers in a survey that was recently conducted say they are comfortable about using technology now, and this used to be around 40% before the pandemic. So this is a major behavioral change from someone who really determines the use of technology. What won't keep happening, I think, after the pandemic is this idea of online classes, very passive methods of learning. I think when it's too passive, it's really disengaging. And we're seeing that after 2 or 3 months of online learning at massive scale around the world, students are getting disengaged, they don't want to participate anymore, they want to drop out. We're seeing this very clearly. So what makes a difference is if we can combine the openness to technology, bring this to be a more interactive, encourage active learning, encourage student personalization of learning. I think if we can do this, it will be transformational.
Wonderful. And you mentioned, Dennis, all these teachers getting adapting to all these new tools. And there are so many tools. There's an app almost for everything right now. So an app for content management, an app for tests, another tool for grading. What do you think? I mean, Charles, do you think we will see this further tremendous unbundling in many different tools, or we're going to see the opposite of the next years?
So I think these things go in stages. First of all, there is an unbundling, which we see as people develop and invent new tools to improve the efficacy of learning. But what happens after that is that these things start to aggregate. And you start to see that already. You see businesses in the States like Chegg, which started off with content and now adds a whole range of other tools, kind of online tutoring to kind of course materials to test and prep. And so what we'll see, as we do in many other industries, is that once you have that initial fragmentation, it starts to reconsolidate and you get some key drivers in the industry, bundle that whole combination. And what we need to remember is at the heart of it, what is a school? What is a university? It is essentially a bundled offering. So that bundled offering is the model that we're used to, and that's where it'll end up. So I think we're just in a stage of unbundling, but it will return back in different form as a bundled combination.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And let me be a bit controversial here. I mean, I have this feeling that in EdTech, a lot of the elements of EdTech is becoming a commodity from the business model to a technology. So, and I would like to ask this for each of you. I mean, my feeling is just maybe brand and content is going to be a differentiator. Do you think everything is becoming a commodity? And if not, what are the differentiators for all of you? Maybe, I don't know, maybe Charles, you can, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think the key bit about education technology is, can we deliver at scale a bespoke service? And that is at the heart of the promised land for education technology. If we can deliver that bespoke element, the personalized service which addresses each individual's need but at scale, then we've delivered what we can with education technology. And that then is no longer a commodity. It is a very discrete, useful tool. If we just focus on a extensive doom-boom type offering where everybody has the same, it's mass distribution just of content of one flavor, it's failed.
I see you nodding, Dennis. What do you think? And then we're going to give it to Matthew. So.
I think Charles' points make a lot of sense. I think a big part of scaling up, at least in developing countries where I come from, is just this massive physical barrier, which is connectivity, right? Schools are not connected. In Brazil, 20% of students don't have access to the internet properly. 42% don't have a combination of great devices and great internet connection. So this is a major barrier, right? So a lot of the changes are not either going to make the world even more equal, which certainly we don't want to, or we need to tackle that. So I think there is one thing that might be a commodity and might be less sexy than talking about the tools and the features, but that we definitely need to talk about as the education community, which is making sure that connectivity to schools and to students is a priority over the next couple of years. Otherwise, we'll just leave many, many people behind.
Absolutely. Very, very relevant point, Dennis. And Matthew, what do you think?
Your question is really a question about education content, and building an actual school or an automated tool that really teaches someone a difficult skill is not so easy. So interactive tools are not as easy to build as mediocre education videos in which the teacher stands in front of a chalkboard and explains things, the MOOC model.
Yeah, totally. You're right. Let me try to go then a bit more in specifics. I mean, we see a lot about this talk about blended models, right? And we see that with this now remote first world, it looks like it's much more blurry line between our digital and physical selves. So maybe this is for you, Dennis. Do you think this line is going to get even blurrier? And you talk about how the community needs to be a part of all these interactions. So what is your feeling around blended educational models?
I think blended education is a fantastic opportunity if we do it right. So I'm trying to use an analogy in some debates, which is you have to separate what is an online classroom and an online lesson, right? And the online classroom is an environment where people are actually working together. And if you blend that and you bring to the physical classroom the debate, kind of a lot of the old talk about the flipped classroom, taking next level, right? You can do some things but you need to have a much more interactive experience. You have to gather the sense of cooperation, develop social learning at school when people are together, and teachers can be very provocative and can take the students to a next level experience. If you think about the hybrid model where it's all about passive learning, or it's all about just extending the school day with the same kind of traditional way of delivering content as Matt was referring to, the teacher teaching in a class, like just lecturing, I think this is going to work. So I think we need to take this opportunity and not only include technology to do the things that we already do, but use technology to open new forms of learning for schools.
Totally. And now switching a bit gears and talking more about the corporates, this is for Matthew. I mean, as you know, here in Telefonica, we have a strong bet on EdTech and education as a whole from the Telefonica Foundation. We do to, as you mentioned before, support communities. Also, our more corporate approach in Educación Digital, where we try to sell also products to other corporates. What do you think in this new world that we're mentioning and discussing today is the role of the corporate, or particularly of the telco, and both as an operator, as a creator of content and platforms, and also as a customer? What do you feel?
So if we're going to reach the bottom billion, it has to be through cell phone carriers. There's no other way. And we need business models that are probably supported by philanthropy or by advertising. We need, in particular, some sort of delightful and addictive game that teaches people to read without a teacher being involved.
I don't know if teachers will love that, but yeah.
Well, no, there will still be a lot for teachers to do. Right now, so Charles alluded earlier to the idea of technology that can emulate a human tutor. And right now we're very far from that. But the thing about exponential technology growth is that once you reach the knee of the curve, it moves very quickly. So I remember when computer translation was just a joke, horrifically inaccurate. There was a famous example of translation from English into Russian and then back of a quote from the Bible. And the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, was translated into Russian, and then it came back as the wine is good, but the meat is rotten, which is maybe an amusing insight into the materiality of the Russian mindset. But now computer translation is roughly as good as human translation.
Indeed.
So that is not to say that there will be no role for human teachers when we hit this inflection point, but rather that the role of human teachers will change. I mean, right now, teachers spend a lot of time doing direct instruction, standing up in front of a chalkboard or whiteboard and talking and trying to keep the attention of an entire group. I'm a former college professor. I have a PhD in English from Yale. I taught at Bowdoin College and Columbia University and the City University of New York, and it's exhausting, right? It's much better for the teacher to be working one-on-one as a mentor. And by the way, I don't know about the ratios in Spain, but in the US, there is one guidance counselor in K-12 schools for every 500 students. So there is no way for that guidance counselor to be giving people advice about their life plan, about how the academic work might connect to a career, especially not discovering a career that is connected to one's passions. So that's something that the teacher needs to be doing ultimately. There's no way to have an administrator do it. So the role of the teacher will change.
Absolutely. I mean, I see that you foresee a better life for teachers in the future. I was sitting in some classes with my girls, which are in primary school during the pandemic, and it was totally insane. All these 20 kids just moving around, impossible to grab the attention. So, I mean, teachers and online teachers are real heroes. So I hope that you are certainly right. And actually before, I mean, Charles, we discussed a bit about the bundling and unbundling. And I have this feeling that when ecosystems mature, and EdTech is certainly maturing, then we need to see how each of these pieces orbit around each other. And there are a few of the planets which are bigger, right? Like the bigger platforms, like the Coursera's of the world, and the rest of the Zooms maybe in the future. And the rest of the tools need to be connecting or interconnecting with each other. What is your feeling around this interdependency and interconnection between tools and platforms?
So I think that the starting point to remember is that we're still at a very early stage in the development of kind of education technology. And if we look at other industries like the media industry, you know, they are already 30-40% digitized, and the education market is probably about 4% digitized. So we're still, when we talk about maturing, we're talking still at the very early steps of that. Though COVID has accelerated that position, I think there is still a long way. I think the other key bit in terms of how this all fits together is that there is a big, difficult conversation around the impact of investment and money, and how does investment play? Because what the sad truth is that schools and universities are short on funding. And what happens, how this changes, is that what it connects all these is the funding is what drives this. So as we emerge from EdTech, what we're seeing is the establishment of growing independent businesses join this together by being able to provide the funding and development capital to that agenda. It then is served back into consumer students and with the help of universities. So why we have, for example, CU, which provides online courses to higher education, is because they can access the capital to fund the development of that program, which the university can't do itself. So what interconnects in terms of answering the question, ultimately money sits behind it, and capital markets and investors move quicker than government and universities. That's what's going to drive the next stage of growth in education technology.
Wonderful. And we are nearing the end to this very insightful debate. And we have all tried to have this crystal ball on the future and talk about things that may happen, future trends. But famously, Jeff Bezos tries to say that he always bets in things that will not change in the next 10 years, right? Because that's the most sure bet you can make. So I would love to ask each of you, and maybe we can start with Dennis, what do you think will not change in EdTech over the next 10 years?
I think what won't change is the need to offer more personalized learning for students. We have hundreds of millions of students. It's impossible to believe that the model that we currently have, that treats them all equal, that assumes they all learn at the same age, at the same pace, is going to change dramatically. It's not going to change. So we need to use technology to fix that. The other thing it's not going to change is that it's really, really hard to teach well at scale. And technology is good at helping doing things at scale. So I think we should look at that because it's going to be hard. The last thing is that we need to think is these sectors are largely going to be driven by government. especially in K through 12. So if we don't solve the way how government is getting engaged with EdTech, we're not going to solve the problem.
Totally, totally. Matthew, what do you think?
Just to build on Dennis's point, sadly, I think the thing that is not going to change is that there is going to be a massive opportunity gap between the privileged around the globe and the vulnerable. And that what we've seen during the pandemic is that most EdTech doesn't work. It's simply not educationally sound. B, even when it does work, it often widens rather than narrows the gap because the poor don't have good access to bandwidth, to their own devices, to private space and freedom from chores. They just don't get to participate in the educational system in the way that the affluent do, even if they're in the same public school system. So that, unfortunately, I don't think is going to change.
And lastly, for you, Charles?
So trying to bring some hope to the conversation. I think one of the things that I think is important and won't change is the role and importance of the teacher. And I think a lot of people have always assumed that technology is about replacement. It's not in this case. It's about enhancement. And what I think we really need to do is to remember that, and in the context of how we encourage and enhance the teacher's ability and capability in the sector. And I often ask myself, who is teaching the teachers? That, I think, is the important bit to go into the next generation of education development for technology.
So we are nearing the end of the debate, and it's been super, super interesting for me. And remember, we started with one question, right? Has EdTech reached a tipping point or not this year? So we'd love to go the other way around to each of you, and you answer to me in one sentence. Charles, has EdTech reached a tipping point in 2020?
Absolutely.
Matthew?
In terms of the belief that education can happen online, yes. It used to be considered a fringe or inadequate substitute, and now people understand that it's the optimal solution in the majority of cases.
And Dennis?
I think we're in the beginning of the tipping point, and it's good to be here.
So, we're going to have this other edition of Enlighten in 2030, in 10 years' time. So I hope that we are also invited to do a panel by then. And then we can see if we were right. We're going to just review this session that has been recorded, and we're going to see if we were right about what changed and what have not changed. But I would really, really like to heartfully thank you for the time we had together. I hope it was interesting for the audience. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for including us.
Thank you.
Thank you.